Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the steps toward a successful migration. Now, I know there's some questions in the chat already about when are these features available, when can I get them, and I'm sure everybody wants to upgrade to version 10 and get all of the stuff in their own environment. Before we do that, we have to take some things into consideration. So the first thing to take into consideration is the deployment scenario. So some of you have servers that you purchased and you're hosting it in-house. So you have an IT team or you just have a server in-house where we've already installed Business One and HANA for you. But some of you have contracted IT services externally. For example, you might have your environment that you purchase, but you have it at a data center. So that's called a hosted environment. You can see the three common ones here. There's obviously more than that, but these are the most common ones that we run into. So on-premise is you purchased, you run it yourself. Hosted is you have a company running it for you somewhere. And then the third one is a cloud deployment. So the shared multi-tenant cloud deployment where it's not just your data, there's a bunch of customers sharing physical resources, or there's a service provider in between that does that for you. They allocate some space for you to run your Business One environment over there. Once we've identified which deployment method you have, which we know because we are implementing you guys, we can talk about the upgrade process itself. Most of this is exactly the same for on-premise or shared in the cloud. The only thing that changes is that for in the cloud, you, the customer, only get involved at the end user validation stage. Everything before that is handled by the company that is doing the hosting for you. So this is the basic chart here. We'll go into more detail in the next slides of these steps here. So the first thing we got to do is check the target version that we're going to. So what do we have to do for that? Well, we have to figure out which target version you want to go to. And typically we do that by either checking what new features you want and when they're available, or if you're running into a problem today that is recurrent and has been identified by SAP as a bug and they've already patched it in some version, then we go to that version. We don't simply, just upgrade for upgrade's sake. We typically upgrade when there's something that is needed, like a new feature or to fix a problem. But we do have some limiting factors there, which are, well, does the new version that we're going to support any add-ons that we're running? So if you have customizations or external solutions that you purchase from other vendors or ourselves, it's possible that those kind of lock you into a specific version. So this is all part of the process where we initially do a bunch of planning before we start working to make sure that we choose the right target version to go to. And sometimes this is very rare, but in 10% of the circumstances, sometimes it requires multiple updates. So that's the last point here, intermediate updates. From some versions that you come from, you can't just go directly to the last version. We have to do more than one upgrade. That means more time in the testing process and more time in the upgrade process. Okay, so when we're reviewing which patch level we're going to go to, there is something that SAP provides for us called the overview note. And every single version of SAP Business One has an overview note dedicated to it, which will tell us what the supported upgrade path is. So it'll tell us if we have to do one or more migrations, and it'll also tell us what the supported operating system and database versions are. So if, for example, you are locked in to a specific operating system version, your IT company will not upgrade it for you, or you just don't have the licenses. We're talking about Microsoft side here to upgrade to a new version. It's possible you may not be able to go to Business One on a new version. So we review this chart with you, we'll give you the options, and then we make that decision together. This is kind of what that note looks like. For example, this is version 10, patch level 3, which is now called Feature Pack 2008 for the year and the month. And you'll see here that there's some highlighted information here regarding what this version supports. So a particular version of the SUSE operating system for the HANA systems, and it's a particular version of the HANA application itself. And it tells us what we can upgrade from on the bottom here. On the right-hand side, you can see I've only displayed 20 entries out of these 252, but every single patch that comes out fixes a bunch of issues and adds a bunch of features sometimes. So there's a whole chart here that we use to determine which one we're going to put you on in the end. And if you guys need access to these, we can share these with you. They're available for the customer. So if you ask for those, we'll send them your way. But this is kind of where we start to look at what version we're going to put you on. Okay, next and super important, and this is very specific to the customer itself, is your customizations, right? Because if we have a system that is just a standalone Business One installation out of the box and you just implemented the Business One modules, it's typically just a process of running the upgrade tool and we're fine. But if you have customizations, you have integrations with EDI, with your warehouse, you have external add-ons, e-commerce, all of those things, then it complicates the migration process significantly. So when we do have those, it is, I would say, almost mandatory that we implement this process step by step, because if we don't do those tests, we're going to run into the problems already when you're live, and it's going to cause downtime for you, and it's going to cost everybody time and money. So that's what we want to avoid by executing these plans as we build them. So if you have customizations, we create a plan, we get in touch with all the vendors that provided those customizations. It could be ourselves or add-ons from other partners. And with that information, we ask them what they support, what new version they support. We build that plan, and then we do those tests. So once we've identified the customizations and we've identified what version you can go to, the actual process of the test migration happens. So there should always be a test migration first, where you can validate everything, and then a productive migration sometime after that. So here's the process. We like to have a clone of the current environment. So this is facilitated when you have a virtual environment, right? So if you're running on VMware or Hyper-V or Amazon or one of the cloud providers, it's much easier because it's just a cloning process where everything is exactly the same, but in a sandbox. So we can do the upgrade there, identify any technical issues, right? Something that just crashes or stops the upgrade in place. Let's say that all goes well. Then we need you, the end users, all the users in your company that have a distinct task, let's call it, to replicate those processes, those daily processes in the test environment. So if you print something out, if you send an email, if you run a particular customization, you should test that in the test environment before we sign off and schedule the productive migration. So we should have a checklist of these are the things you do. So that's a checklist that you internally, so the user processes themselves, it's not possible for consensus to know what each individual user does every day. So that's something that we ask you, the customer, whoever is the lead of the project on the customer side, to get those checklists going. So we'll have a general checklist for the migration, but there should be internal checklists as well for these processes need to be validated on the new version before we move. We would catalog any upgrade issues. So those could be technical or functional. And then we'd come up with a plan to implement those fixes. And what that allows us to do is that once we have everything written down and we have fixes in place, we might have had to reach out to other vendors or to SAP for those specific issues. We can then schedule the productive migration. And the day that we do the productive migration, we can implement those fixes immediately instead of finding out 3-5 days after that there's a problem and then scrambling to try to fix it. All right, so the productive migration can be scheduled, like I said, after all the changes are validated. We'll back up the productive environment. We'll execute a new migration on that new copy, which has your latest data. So your company's up to date. And then once that migration is done, you'll go in and you'll do a quick validation of business critical processes. So make sure you can add a sample sales order like in a test company on the now productive environment. Make sure you can cancel a document, make sure you can email, those kind of things. And of course, whenever we do a migration, there's a period after that where we're in, let's say, migration support mode. So whoever does the migration on our side is kind of dedicated to you at that point to make sure that right after a migration, that week after, you have quicker access to support and we can fix any major issue right away.